So I'll ask you first to tell us on Cam your full name, your title, or what you're doing with RCN, and since when.
Okay. Um, Actually, I don't know that. So so my name is Lisa Raven. I'm the executive director of Returning to Spirit, but I'm also a member of the. I'm also a board member. I'm not sure how long. I'm not sure since when.
We got that. That's not a big
Okay.
deal. But since when you Return to Spirit works with RCN? Since when?
We began dialoguing in 2019.
2019.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So thank you so much for accepting to talk to us today about the work that RCN is doing about the truth and reconciliation. So to start with, I think it's important for us to understand who you are. So briefly tell us about your personal and your professional journey and how it led you to be involved in 2019 with RCN on its journey toward truth and reconciliation.
Well, my name is Lisa Raven. I'm from Hollow Water First Nation. So I was born and raised there, and I still live there today. Over the course of my career, I've worn many professional hats, but they've always revolved around healing and around reconciliation. In 2019, I was invited to be a part of RCN's reconciliation journey. And it wasn't just a decision. I would say it was a moment of alignment for me. The organization's desire to walk the path of reconciliation and not just to issue statements or to check off boxes was something that that's something I was very interested in, but it was also something that I felt that I wanted to be a part of and to stand with.
So how did you get to know RCN? Was it our CEO, Daniel Lucier, who contacted you? Or it was you who contacted, or it was a relationship with the bishop?
No, I was introduced to Dan through a mutual friend, Jerry Labassiere. And so back in 2018, we started talking about reconciliation. So Jerry had taken Returning to Spirit, and him and I had remained friends for many years. And so when Dan and RCN started talking about their RCN journey, everything just kind of clicked. It was like, oh, well, I know someone, and so the conversation started from there. Yeah.
So it was all about relationship. And this is a lot the work. I don't like that word related to reconciliation, but it's all about building relationship. And it starts there. Reconciliation is a very personal journey for each person. You said once, reconciliation is a moment, and we need to keep building on moments where we feel reconciled. How do you envision the work that needs to be done by Catholic organizations working in health and social services to make sure that each Indigenous person feels safe and welcome when they walk through the doors of our organization?
Mm-hmm. Well, I say that reconciliation is a collection, right? It's a collection of moments, and so what I mean is that it's not a policy, it's not a plaque, or it's not a statement, but it's more, right? And so it's grounded in relationship, and so reconciliation is those moments when somebody feels truly heard and truly understood. And so for me, reconciliation, it's not about being perfect, and it's more about being honest, being humble, the willingness to to walk with. And so I think that, as, Catholic organizations and those social service spaces, The welcoming and the relationship begins before you even enter the door, right? And so I think that, that begins in the spirit of the organization. And that's something that's experienced, right? Because relationship is cultural, but it's spiritual, and it's also emotional. And so I think that as Catholic organizations, begin to more and more like decolonize their spaces, and truly, create spaces for not only Indigenous people, but other people who are, who are different, to
feel welcome.
Yeah, to feel welcome, and to feel like they belong. I think that's foundational. That's foundational to reconciliation.
So you felt that opening about Réseau Compassion Network organization to be working towards building more welcoming, safe, culturally safe organization, and that's what led you to wanted to be involved more and more?
Yeah, well, at first it was an invitation to a conversation, and so for me, relationships they're pivotal, because like we don't have a lot of time in this world, and everybody is busy, right? And so for me, it's about where I want to focus my energy and where I want to focus my intention, and that is based in relationships. And so, in the early days, my husband came to the first retreat in Gimli, and then he also came to the Czech conference in Montreal. And that was important for me, because, he was welcomed, and he was invited, and, we have a really close kind of trusting relationship. And I also I rely on his judge of character. And, we both determined that, RCN was a place that, an organization that genuinely wanted to begin to transform their conversation, to transform their spaces in a way that, not only changes people, but also starts to change systems. Because if you start to alter people, then systems start to alter as well. And so that's something you can't fake. And so, like as we started to get introduced more and more, to the people in the organization and, the people on the board, what we saw was, people that were open, and people that walked with humility, and and like that's rare. So so for me it was no question. This was something that I wanted to be a part of, and to help like kind of forge that path forward. And so that was, I would say, one of the biggest reasons for me, for wanting to join the board of RCN, but also to continue unfolding the relationship.
Because that's true. Now you join the board of RCN, but so what does that mean? I'm guessing you did a lot of work, personal work about your own relationship with the church or the Catholic faith. So what does that mean, all this, now that you go up all the way up to sitting on the board of Réseau Compassion Network, who is responsible for 13 health and social services agencies, Catholic organization, like your relationship with the church or the Catholic religion, it's been a long process, right? Because for you to be open to work with RCN or to be part of RCN means that you had to did a lot of spiritual work around the religion itself. and what it did to your people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for me, so I've been, I've been studying, and living and walking the ways of reconciliation for almost 20 years. And, it hasn't always been, an easy journey. But I don't think that, I don't think that things that are worthwhile are supposed to be easy. But I found that throughout my career, more and more as I stepped into Catholic spaces, into Catholic conversations, what it highlighted for me maybe was some of those areas at times that maybe weren't healed, right? Or maybe that needed, further, reconciliation or a deeper look. And reconciliation doesn't happen in a vacuum. Right? Like you need to be in relationship. And often it's in relationship with those people who, maybe, were the source, or maybe were, directly or directly linked to the past. And, that takes courage, on both sides, because it's not, sometimes it gets uncomfortable, when you're in these conversations, uncomfortable for both sides, but I also think that that's necessary, because you can't, you can't create a new path, or you can't, forge a new road forward without a little bit of, uncomfortability. And so for me, that's one of the things that I really appreciated, I think, about RCN, was its willingness to be uncomfortable, especially, when it comes to maybe taking a look and addressing some of the harms, that the Catholic Church, was a part of. And that's not a small thing, it takes a lot of courage, to look at yourself, in the mirror. And most people, they look away, they don't want to, they don't want to go there. And so then, reconciliation efforts then just become really surface, right? It becomes, boxes that we want to check, or statements that we want to make, or one day initiatives that we fund, and in the name of reconciliation, right? But it doesn't produce any long-term effects or changes, and that's what's important. I think as we journey forward, it's to not only choose the path. Sometimes that is not the easiest path, but to keep choosing it over and over and over again. And that is what, reconciliation is, because, that's what we do when we're in relationships with people. Sometimes it gets bumpy, but we keep choosing, we keep choosing the relationship over and over again. And so, that is the essence of reconciliation. And I believe, that, it is possible, because sometimes I think people get confused, with the idea that, systems reconcile. Well, they don't, right? Like, systems don't reconcile, people do. But people are made up of organizations, and people create those systems. And so as we start to, reconcile even some of our differences, or the ways that we, misunderstand each other, then I think that there's hope there. And that's what I want to be a part of. And that's what I think that, RCN gives me an opportunity to do.
It's a journey for sure, not a project. What are your thoughts about the process, that journey that RCN set in motion? And how far have we come in your acknowledgement on the arms done, past and present? Like, are we on the right path? If we're always building on relationship, what I hear is like we're doing good, but What's your opinion? Are we on the right path, or is there some that we can do more or better? There's always some that we can do more or better, but I'd like to hear from you.
Well, are we on the right path? I would say yes, because we've chosen a path, and and that matters. And so, I think RCN is on the right path because it has chosen to be on that path, and in the small ways, like in the small ways that are important. The reconciliation it's something that you can't measure it, right? Like you can't measure the success on a spreadsheet, right? And you can't audit trust, right? And so it shows up in these quiet, small ways, and that's how we know that we're on the right path. I was at St. Boniface Hospital once, and I had to, go through, the emergency room. I happened to be wearing my ribbon skirt, and my last name is Raven. And so for me, success is measured in a nurse taking the time, to ask me, what does my name mean? Or what does my skirt represent? And, and having that conversation with me. And so those aren't things that, show up on a metric, or in a pie chart, but it's an experience, and so if for me, as, an Indigenous woman, walking into a Catholic space or, a health, or service space, and I walk in and I feel comfortable, like I don't have to brace myself. Well, for me, that's another measure, that we're on the right path, because things are starting to alter. Now, a lot of the organizations within, RCN's network, they have sacred spaces where smudging, is now it's respected, right? And it's not questioned, and I've heard people, within RCN speak about, the harms, that have been done in the past. But also, I mean, that's important. But what's also important was them even talking about how maybe some of those harms still exist today. And so for me, that is inspiring, because as those conversations continue to, see the light, well, then it starts to affect, everybody who's around, everyone who listens, everyone in that conversation, everyone in that circle, and then those people, that are coming.
What are the challenges that are still ahead of us? I heard openness. I heard creating safe space. I like hearing that. I heard that our organization are willing to learn and unlearn, or should I say unlearning and then relearning. And they are eager to go for the truth, to understand the truth, to state the truth, and therefore reconciled as much as possible with themselves and with others. But I'm sure there's still a lot of challenges ahead of us.
Yeah, I think, well, I would say one of the challenges is fatigue, right? Because, reconciliation, it's not a destination, right? It's a journey, and it's not a 100-yard sprint, right? It's actually it's more of a long-term commitment.
It's a marriage.
Yeah, it is. It is a marriage, because it's relational. And so I think, the challenge would be, for people to, emotionally, or spiritually, or even institutionally, grow tired, of the word reconciliation or even the process before we even get started, because I think that we're only now just getting started. I think another challenge in a lot of spaces is resistance, right? And so that can be subtle, and sometimes that can be loud.
Resistance to being uncomfortable, or don't want to go into that space, or
Yeah,
or it's racism.
Well, I think all of that, because I think there are still some, let's say there's still some people, whether, in leadership or not, who experience fear, when it comes to change, or, when it comes to thinking about, like, what is it that, reconciliation, might demand, what it might demand of them, because systems don't, they don't like to change.
And that means looking inward, right?
Yeah.
So starting your own personal journey and process into what I need to face as being the truth, what is my responsibility, and what can I do now? You're right. Like, this is not an easy task for every individual, and then to try to put that into our organization and apply some changes. That's another level of complexity.
I think another challenge, is trust, right? Because, trust is the foundation of every relationship. And in this relationship, if we're talking about, Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, well, there's a history, right, of that trust, being broken more than once. And so, trust is something that, doesn't happen from land acknowledgements, or, it doesn't come from apologies. It's actually created in relationship, and it's created, through consistency, through, being humble, through, conversations. And so I think that there are some real challenges, but, I don't hold them like excuses. I hold them more of like, like what if we didn't hold them, as an excuse? What if we held them more, as an invitation, right? So an invitation to look deeper, right? To speak deeper with each other. Like, what if reconciliation wasn't about optics, right? And what if it was more about, deepening the relationship, and, and channeling, the direction more inward, as opposed to more outward.
So it's working on our bias. It's working on our own judgment or perception, and trying to put down that fear of making mistake. I think those are two big challenges. If I speak for myself, like, we're all have bias and perception, and then if you're looking at what you think and then you want to do good, but also you don't want to make a mistake, sometimes it just it makes it so much difficult to try to get into a relationship. You don't want to be awkward. You don't want to be disrespectful. You don't want to hurt more. How we teach that, Lisa? How as white people we got to know more about how to reconcile?
Well, I think one, we have to alter the way that we look at reconciliation, like our relationship to it, not as something that we're doing, right? But more like it's something that we're becoming. And so, I think when we hold it personal that way, and the paradox of it is that reconciliation is personal, but it's not personal at all. And so for me, the grounding of that in any relationship, and no matter who you're with, it is really intention. And I think that if a person's intentions, are honest, right, and that they're well placed, well, that's a guide. And I think as we learn to trust, each other, right, we first have to learn to trust ourselves. And that is trusting, where our intentions come from, and what trusting what we're saying, right, and trusting who we are, and being able to bring that forward, and one of the things I would say for me is a measure of that is like, when like, are we still walking, this path of reconciliation, in 10 years, still walking with integrity, with humility, with a willingness, right, to be, transformed, even, when the spotlight fades. And
even more when the spotlight fades.
Yeah.
So we just keep trusting and building relationship. Anything else?
And faith. Right? And so, like, how then, if it's trust, if it's faith, right, if it's love, like, then where's the distinction, between spirituality, religion, and reconciliation, right? Like, then they're not. They're integrated, and I think they always have been integrated. I think it was us, right, who created, that distinction in the first place. Yeah. And that is part of the unlearning, right? That's what we have to unlearn. It isn't so much, it isn't so much the systems and things like that, but, it's our relationship, to those things.
Going back to our roots. Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know if you have anything else that you would like to add, because I went right, left, in the middle. I add some question, I remove some. Is there anything else that you would like to add, Lisa?
Well, I think there is one thing, and that is, that what I think is important, from organizations and a network, like RCN, is the stand, right? That even if nobody knew that we were doing reconciliation, right? That people, Indigenous people and other people, who are different, that, they would feel it when they're under our care, right? When they're in our circles, right? And when they're in our conversation. And that's what's missing, is that sometimes organizations, they're doing it because that's what they're doing, as a task, right? Not as a way of being. And I speak about St. Boniface Hospital, because I think for me, in my experience there, that I really got that. I really got that, reconciliation was something important for them. I didn't get it from seeing the posters or the statements on the wall, but I got it from how I was treated and the experience that I had there. And to me, that's important, right? So it's the distinction between doing reconciliation and being reconciliation. And I think every seed, every seed that we plant, right? I mean, it just has the opportunity to grow.
Being reconciliation. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.